Hello and welcome back to Brian's Things That Are Cool. I started this channel to explore media that shaped me as a kid. I've talked a lot about Disney, Nickelodeon, and a few others, but one I haven't talked much about yet is HBO. The story of HBO begins way back in September of 1966 when Charles Dolan's company, Sterling Information Services, began a limited cable service in New York City to bring tourist information and news to hotels, apartment buildings, and offices. By 1971, losing money and desperate not to lose everything, Dolan came up with the Green Channel, which would be a subscription service that would show unedited movies and sports events without commercials. With the backing of Time Life, the Green Channel was given a development grant that November. Initially, the service was going to be called Sterling Cable Channel, but ultimately they decided on Home Box Office, or HBO, as this channel was to be the customer's ticket to movies and sports events, all from the comfort of their own home. The night of the channel's launch on November 8, 1972, saw strong winds in New York City that knocked out the reception dish needed to relay the signal. A technician was sent out to repair it and completed his repair just 25 minutes before the channel was launched, with an NHL game between the New York Rangers and the Vancouver Canucks from Madison Square Garden being its first offering, and Paul Newman's 1971 drama Sometimes a Great Notion being the first film shown. HBO was here. So let's head back to the late 80s and early 90s and take a look at the premium cable movie channel, HBO. Encyclopedia was created for HBO in collaboration with Children's Television Workshop and ran for 23 episodes from September 26, 1988 to February 20th, 1989. A few of the show's writers had worked on Saturday Night Live, including Mitchell Kriegman, who went on to create Clarissa Explains It All for Nickelodeon. Each episode would focus on one letter of the alphabet, except for one episode combining U and V, and one episode combining X, Y, and Z, with short comedy sketches educating the young viewer on topics corresponding to that day's letter. Each episode will feature one of the topics done as a rock number by the band Betty, who also performed the show's opening and closing theme song. And I was surprised to learn are still together.
Start rocking with short bones.
Skull, spine, Elvis.
Other cast members included Obie Award-winning playwright and drag queen Ethel Eichelberger, Jim Fife, who horror fans may recognize as Stewart from Michael J. Fox's The Frighteners, and Faith Prince, who also went on to work with Michael J. Fox, this time on the sitcom Spin City. With the sheer amount of children's educational programming at the time, it's a wonder that a show with only 23 episodes from over 35 years ago has stuck with me as it has. But with fun performances, creativity, and overall weirdness, I may have found my answer in Encyclopedia.
Hey, everybody. Don't panic. I'm only crushing your head.
Kids in the Hall came together when two separate comedy stage groups merged in Toronto. Bruce McCullough and Mark McKinney were in a group called The Audience, while Dave Foley and Kevin McDonald were in one called The Kids in the Hall. The merger solidified when Mark met Scott Thompson and asked him to join in 1985. After a brief hiatus to try their hand at a number of projects, the group reunited in 1986 and were seen by Saturday Night Live creator Lorne Michaels, who knew he just had to bring the group to television. Both the Canadian Television Network and HBO aired the series, with HBO running the series from 1989 to 1993, when CBS picked up the show for its final 2 seasons. HBO would move on to another surreal sketch comedy show with Mr. Show with Bob and David, which was great as well. Thanks partly to being on a cable network, the sketch comedy of The Kids in the Hall was more rebellious and no holds barred, and I think that's why it's as endearing as it is. With characters like Buddy Cole, Cabbage Head, and Chicken Lady, they had the rare ability to venture into the absolute absurd and still land every joke. The kids would get their own movie with Brain Candy in 1996, as well as a number of reunions over the years, and it's not hard to see why they still hold a special place in people's hearts. I even got to meet Dave Foley a couple of years ago. Not only a comic genius, but a great guy.
And as for Chapter 16, it's fantastic. Really, I wouldn't touch a word. In fact, you
won't have to work. You can sit home and paint your toenails and just look beautiful.
Well, it's a bestseller. What can I tell you?
You can tell me where you get off of talking about my toenails.
Dream On aired on HBO from July 8, 1990 to March 27, 1996. Created by Marta Kaufman and David Crane, the team that went on to create Friends, Dream On follows a recently divorced book editor in Manhattan named Martin Tupper, trying to navigate his professional life while raising his son, dating, and dealing with his ex-wife. Martin, played by Brian Benben, was raised watching TV, so he'll often have thoughts or fantasies come to him in the form of public domain clips from old TV shows and films. I grew up on so many classic shows and movies I kind of relate to that. The show came together when John Landis came across old television programs that Universal had in its library and asked if he could make a show out of them. Then he got Michael Crane and Marta Kaufman to come up with a premise. John Landis would even direct some of the episodes. Dream On falls into the category of TV shows and movies I shouldn't have been watching at the time, but did anyway. Much of it went over my head, though there's a lot of nudity and swearing. Martin's inner thoughts shown as clips from TV shows always struck me as creative, and the characters were hilarious, like Martin's secretary Toby, or his boss played by Michael McKean. Maybe it wasn't a show for an 8-year-old kid, but certainly one to revisit as an adult.
This, of course, means you're turning right. And this means you're turning left. And this means... slow down. It's time to watch Tales from the Crypt.
Tales from the Crypt ran on HBO for 7 seasons between June 10th, 1989 and July 19th, 1996. Despite effectively being shut down by a 1954 Senate subcommittee investigation, publisher William Gaines Horror Comics, including Tales from the Crypt, influenced a generation of directors and writers with a taste for the macabre. So much so that in the late 80s, executive producers Richard Donner, David Giler, Joel Silver, Robert Zemeckis, and Walter Hill set out to bring these beloved stories to television. HBO, again being cable, meant they could be as gory as they wanted to be, and audiences like me wouldn't have it any other way. The stories were adapted not just from the Tales from the Crypt line of EC Comics, but The Vault of Horror, The Haunt of Fear, Crime Suspense Stories, and Two-Fisted Tales. The original EC Horror Comics featured 3 main storytellers, which included the Old Witch and the Vault Keeper. But the show chose the Crypt Keeper as its host, as had the 1972 film adaptation, though the show's version of the Crypt Keeper, voiced by John Kazir, is kind of a mixture of all 3 storytellers from the comic. Each episode features well-known actors, from Brad Pitt to Joe Pesci, generally getting their bloody comeuppance in some beautifully over-the-top manner. And with the exception of Steven Weber's episode, Mornin' Mess, I was always along for the ride. That one stands out as the only one that gave me nightmares. I don't know why. Tales from the Crypt was one of my first exposures to the horror genre, and to this day I consider it one of my comfort shows. I even watched the Saturday morning cartoon version on CBS as a kid, even if it was significantly toned down.
Hail Mars.
Hail Mars. Death to humans.
Perversions of Science came to HBO in 1997, a year after Tales from the Crypt had ended its 7-season run. This wasn't the first attempt at a Tales from the Crypt spin-off. In 1991, the Fox network attempted a show based on EC Comics' line of adventure stories, Two-Fisted Tales. The pilot was made as an anthology TV movie with 3 separate tales: Yellow, Showdown, and King of the Road. But when it didn't gain any interest from viewers on Fox, Crypt Keeper segments were shot and the episodes were aired separately as part of Tales from the Crypt, with Yellow even playing as the final episode. But HBO ultimately decided to pick up Tales from the Crypt for 4 more seasons. The same executive producers who brought Tales from the Crypt to the small screen wanted to do the same for EC Comics' line of science fiction comics. Incredible science fiction, weird fantasy, and of course, weird science. With Weird Science being the name of a John Hughes classic, the showrunners opted for a sexier title, Perversions of Science. With the name change came an equally sexy host, an early CGI-rendered female robot named Chrome, voiced by Lucy Lane from 1984 Supergirl, Maureen Teefy, making lewd sexual innuendos instead of the ghoulish puns from The Crypt Keeper.
You've got it all wrong. Size does matter. The bigger, the badder. If it's too small, it barely makes a dent.
The early CGI may not look very good today, and the sex jokes are a little bit tiresome, but the opening credit sequence with Danny Elfman's score makes up for it. Perversions of Science not being a horror-based show meant it relied more on twist endings, which were done really well. I don't want to give it away, but a great example is Episode 4, The Exile, where Jeffrey Combs plays a sadistic killer in a space prison who's forced into exile when rehabilitation is deemed impossible. Unfortunately, the show never found an audience and was canceled after only 10 episodes, but it's one I remember fondly. We went to the movies a lot when I was a kid, but there are a number of films that I saw for the very first time on HBO. Here's a handful of movies that were played in heavy rotation on HBO that I would catch anytime they aired.
Hold the boat! Hold the boat! Hold the boat, please! Hold on, we'll be right there! Hold the boat! One more coming!
Weekend at Bernie's was released in theaters by 20th Century Fox on July 5th, 1989. Director of the first Rambo movie, Ted Kotcheff, brings us the story of Larry and Richard, played by Andrew McCarthy and Jonathan Silverman, who after discovering a major fraud at their insurance company are invited by their boss Bernie Lomax, played by Terry Kaiser, to spend the weekend at his lavish beach house. But when they show up, they find their boss dead, so they do what anyone else would do.
Why don't we just pretend he didn't die? Just for a bit.
Thus leading to some top-shelf slapstick comedy. Critics at the time claimed the movie is tasteless, and to that I say, yeah, that's what makes it great. The movie was such a part of my childhood that I even got a chance to meet Catherine Mary Stewart, who played Gwen last October, and we talked about her favorite scenes. She said she loved filming the lighthouse sequence with Jonathan Silverman. For me, it was their date scene where he tries to convince her that the man in his underwear who interrupts their date is his butler, when it's really his father. Richard's father in that scene is played by the movie's director, Ted Kotcheff. With movies like Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Lethal Weapon 2, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the summer of 1989 saw a lot of competition. Despite that, Weekend at Bernie's did make a profit, and even got a sequel 4 years later, which is equally as enjoyable. How can you go wrong with a zombie Bernie?
We're VIPs.
Right here.
Very immense penises.
Revenge of the Nerds 2, Nerds in Paradise was released in theaters by 20th Century Fox on July 10th, 1987. The boys of Lambda 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 head to a national fraternity convention in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, but when they arrive, they're faced with more discrimination by the Alpha Betas. The film was shot on location in Fort Lauderdale and Miami during spring break, and utilized actual vacationing college students as extras, as well as a few kidnapped MTV viewers. That's right. While the movie was in production, MTV had a contest called MTV Body Snatchers, where the winner would be kidnapped by the rap group The Beastie Boys and brought to Florida to be an extra in this movie. Not sure how they put that idea together, but there you go. Before the film got off the ground, Fox went through a major regime change, and Leonard Goldberg's first act as the new president was to greenlight a Nerd sequel, disregarding the no sequel rule of the previous administration. Director of the first movie, Jeff Canoe, wasn't too happy, saying, "It's done. The Nerds won. What are you going to do? Have them win again?" So director Joe Roth was given the job. I love all the Nerds movies, but HBO seemed to play the second one more when I was growing up, which is why it's usually the one I choose to watch when I need my nerd fix. Most of the Nerds returned, except for Brian Toschi, who had already signed on for another Police Academy movie, and Anthony Edwards was regulated to 2 cameo scenes as he was shooting another movie at the time. So we get a few new faces this time around, like James Hong as Snotty Wong, who becomes Booger's mentor in being absolutely disgusting. Speaking of Booger, Curtis Armstrong wasn't all that interested in reprising his role either, but when the studio told him they had hired MASH co-writer Larry Gelbart to improve the script, he agreed to be in it. This was actually a lie by the studio, but I'm happy Curtis Armstrong decided to do it. He's one of my favorite character actors, and he's so funny in this. Even though the critics tore it apart, Revenge of the Nerds 2 was very successful at the box office, though the remaining two films in the franchise were rather forgettable made-for-TV movies. Nerds 2 is one of those times when a film not made for kids at all becomes a massive hit with kids. So they try to smooth out the rough edges for the sequel, but they keep just enough of the crude, vulgar humor to make Revenge of the Nerds 2: Nerds in Paradise one of my favorite 80s movies.
Desist and leave the swimming area now, mister! Move it, now!
Police Academy 5: Assignment Miami Beach was released by Warner Brothers on March 18, 1988. Director of classic television shows like Laverne and Shirley and The Bob Newhart Show, Alan Meyerson takes on the 5th installment of the series that finds our misfits in blue traveling to Miami Beach for a police convention. But when Commandant Lassard accidentally picks up the wrong bag at the airport that contains stolen diamonds, the bumbling jewel thieves need to find him and get it back. Most of the cast returned, though Steve Guttenberg turned the movie down because he was filming Three Men and a Baby. That meant a new character, played by Matt McCoy, was brought in to be exactly like Mahoney in every way but name. When Guttenberg turned down Part 6 as well, McVoy reprised his role of Sergeant Nick Lassard. I would have liked to have seen Bobcat Goldthwait come back for this one, but him and the producers couldn't agree on his salary. As is, there are some great gags, with each character getting at least one scene to brilliantly showcase their personality quirks. I could have talked about the series as a whole here, as I watched them all countless times, but Police Academy 5: Assignment Miami Beach seems to be the one I have the most nostalgia for. And it's always there to serve, protect, and make you laugh out loud.
Yeah, well, maybe my balls don't itch. All balls itch, it's a fact.
Just One of the Guys was released by Columbia Pictures on April 26, 1985. Director Lisa Gottlieb brings this gender-bending tale of high schooler Terry Griffith, who misses out on getting a big internship at a newspaper. Convinced she didn't get it because she's a girl, she decides to switch schools, get a haircut, and pose as a boy to prove it. Joyce Heiser as Terry plays great against some fantastic broad characters, including Billy Jane as Buddy, Terry's constantly horny younger brother, and Karate Kid's William Zabka, cementing his status as the ultimate movie jerk playing the bully, Greg Tolan. The original title was I Was a Teenage Boy, and the story was loosely based on William Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. Very loosely. While the film wasn't a box office hit, its airings on HBO made it kind of a cult film. It became popular enough that in 1993, a film with a similar plot in which a boy, played by Corey Haim, goes to high school as a girl, was retitled from Anything for Love to Just One of the Girls, to trick the audience into thinking it was a sequel, which it wasn't. But no unofficial sequel, or unofficial remake, can top the original. With memorable characters and highly quotable lines, it's everything you could want from an 80s teen comedy. Inappropriate at times, to be sure, but definitely one you won't forget.
Egg? Were you the little fat boy?
No, but I just like to beat him up. You know, I grab him, I go, why are you so fat? Why are you so fat? And I beat the shit out of him.
One Crazy Summer was released by Warner Brothers on August 8, 1986. It was the second in a trilogy of surreal comedies from director Savage Steve Holland, starting with Better Off Dead the year before, and How I Got Into College from 1989. Better Off Dead was a big movie for me as a kid as well, but One Crazy Summer was definitely my favorite. Holland's bizarre humor was recognizable in his later work, including his cartoon for Fox Kids, Eek the Cat. John Cusack stars as Hoops McCann, an aspiring cartoonist who's convinced by his friend George, played by Bill Murray's brother Joel, to join him for a summer of fun in Nantucket. The movie was shot in and around Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and has some of the best character actors in the business. Savage Steve Holland tended to reuse certain actors, and along with John Cusack, Curtis Armstrong makes his second appearance in one of Holland's productions, having played Charles DeMar in Better Off Dead. Bobcat Goldthwait has arguably one of the funniest scenes in the movie as Egg, and it's always nice to see SCTV's Joe Flaherty show up, who is an incredible talent who could make anything funny. The animated segments were done by Bill Kopp, who went on to create Eat the Cat with Savage Steve Holland, and had done the animated segments in Better Off Dead as well. Better Off Dead wasn't well liked by critics, or John Cusack as it turns out, but two certain critics' review of it so incensed Savage Steve Holland that he had Bill Kopp animate two bunnies that looked just like these critics get blown up at the end of One Crazy Summer. 2 thumbs up indeed. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my look back on growing up with HBO. If you'd like to be kept up to date as to when I release a new video, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. And if you really want to be notified, hit that bell as well. I'm Brian, and I'll see you next time on Brian's Things That Are Cool.